Welcome back to Rockstock Channel. It is Wednesday, November 5th, and we're here today with news from California's Salton Sea, aka Lithium Valley. Controlled Thermal Resources Holdings announced on Monday that its board of directors has approved the formation and planned U.S. public listing of a subsidiary of theirs called American Critical Resources, ACR, which is expected to be publicly traded on either NASDAQ or NYSE in the middle of 2026. Rod Colwell, CEO, is here with Matt, Rodney, and me to discuss this news and how American Critical Resources plans to become an important part of U.S. lithium independence. CTR and American Critical Resources efforts mirror what Vulcan Energy has been developing in Europe: geothermal heat and brine that can also be a zero carbon source of battery grade lithium. On the RK Equity scoreboard, Vulcan has one of the highest market valuations of all pre revenue development projects. For disclosure purposes, RK Equity is not a strategic advisor to nor invested in Controlled Thermal or American Critical Resources. But we've known Rod a long time, and we've agreed to create some educational content for him and the company for our audience. As always, note that we are not financial advisors and nothing you will hear today is financial advice. Please do your own research and read the disclaimer at the end of this video. And before we begin, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Lithium Royalty Corp and USCF Investments. Lithium Royalty Corp is traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange, ticker symbol LIRC, and holds more than 30 royalties on hard rock and brine projects such as Core Lithium in Australia, Sigma Lithium in Brazil, and Trey Q and Mariana projects owned by Zijin and Ganfeng in Argentina. USCF Investments is a pioneer in commodity ETFs for nearly 20 years. Their 15 funds include single commodity exposure, broad diversification with SDCI, and themes like ZSB for battery metals and USG for gold with income. To find out more, watch our inaugural episode with their CEO, John Love, and visit uscfinvestments.com. And with that, welcome, Rod, for the first time to Rockstock Channel. Please tell us a bit about yourself and what you've been doing with these projects for some 8 years now, and then Rodney and Matt will dig in with some questions.
Thank you, Howard. Great pleasure to be back. I know we've known each other for some time, Rodney. We've been on panels over the years, and Matt, nice to meet you. So, and welcome everyone. I think time and timing from CTR's perspective is everything, and I think the timing for us to announce the American Critical Resources is, the big hands caught up with the little hands. So, again, 8 years of active work, Howard, but really 13 years of blood, sweat, and tears out there at the Salton Sea, sort of proving or disproving, whether it be technology, whether it be resource and variability. And I think some of the points I'd like to talk about today is, CTR is not a single play lithium play. I mean, lithium was a focal point with the work that we've done over the years on our demonstration plant, definitive feasibility, and other parts when lithium was really moving, in 21, 22. I think that, that work that was done effectively to basically get to a lot of focus is on DLE, but to get to a clean, a pathway to a good recovery rate is actually about proper pre-treatment. And I think CTR and ACR are here to talk about our zinc and manganese, potash, and other minerals that I think are now either in the stage of being already proven on a definitive feasibility study or in future development and that pathway forward. So again, we have a fully permitted site. We're in the Fast 41 process to finish a final federal permit, which is imminent. I think we have great support from the White House. In fact, we're there on Friday. We've got great partnerships with our friends at General Motors and Stellantis for a long-term basis, and 50 megawatts of power that we're effectively sort of from a diversity point of view now in negotiations with AI and data centers on that. So again, privileged to be here and happy to take questions.
Okay. Rod, thanks very much for that. Good intro. So let's bang on. In the last little while, we've heard quite a lot about the Smackover Formation in Texas and Arkansas, and to a lesser extent oil field brines in Saskatchewan and Canada. How does the Salton sea brine stack up against those resources?
Well, I think firstly, every brine is different, right? Whether it's Anacarmo, Smackover, it's all different chemistries. Our brine is a superheated brine, right? So 700 degrees. Obviously, with the effective way of cooling that brine is through a steam turbine. So that's where we get the energy. We also have the kinetic energy with the brine, right? So when we concentrate in real time, we're not using any other heat source to be able to do that, or evaporation or anything like that, Matt. I think the Smacko is a great resource. I mean, there's a lot of plays going on there. I think Standard and others are doing great work. I think you read a lot about, or you know a lot about. The first point is what's the concentrations of ppm. I think that needs to be balanced. Is what's the flow rate of the brine itself? For a CTR will flow about 6 million pounds an hour, ultimately up to about 60 million pounds an hour when we get out fully develop our geothermal business. So, you're moving a lot of brine in regards to concentration. So I would say that the other point, and it's great. We know everyone. The Equinors and Exxons and others that are getting in there. But I'd say the Salton Sea Field's probably limiting factor is the availability of access to resource. Right, you've got the privates like CTR, the Circa ESM, and of course Berkshire Hathaway pretty much have most of the permeable mineralized resource holdings. In our case, approximately 6,000 acres, which is equivalent to a gigawatt of power and a lot of minerals. So, but look, I think this is a non-competitive business. I mean, in the sense that regardless of markets, it appears to be still demand. I think it's shifting, whether that's AI, BESS, and other sources. So I think wishing those guys all the best. We know them very, very well, and they're doing great work out there.
Okay, cool. And I mean, you talk to people in the industry, and the sort of feedback that we get is that the Salton Sea brine is very complex. From what you're saying, you've taken those lemons and you're making lemonade with them. So, how does that sort of influence your choice of processing solutions? And you talked about sort of polymetallics and everything else. So, yeah.
Yeah, look, I think I won't speak for any other, Brian. It is a very, it's like your grandmother's soup, right? You're not real sure exactly what's in it. We've had INL, the Idaho National Lab, validate what we do. The rare earths and the other parts of that. What is economically, what exists versus what's economically recoverable is a opportunity and a challenge as you move forward. So the cause and effect of that is, of course, our focal point, if we do have an IP, was we have to remove the iron silica, number one. That is definitely a saleable product. We're not taking that to a landfill. That's a CO2 free cement product and other permeable products like hardy type products. So you're not, you're mitigating, you're actually getting some revenue from that. The polymetallics, and that's recovered from a very known novel process, CRC process. That's been around the Salton Sea for 45 years. Removing the polymetallics, which are predominantly, zinc and manganese, silver, and some other metals. We really need to remove those before you get to DLE. So that effectively was a pH shift to be able to get those metals out, and they are commercial products. Like we have arrangements with a certain company will be announced soon on manganese and zinc sulfate for micronutrient agricultural products, which are generally imported. So, and that's 108,000 tons per year, stream of those metal products. So then, of course, we've got a very clean stream for be able to deal with recovery of lithium through the DLE. And I think the other challenge we had to deal with, and there's a lot of players out there claiming they have the secret sauce and they can do everything, but honestly, it's number one about pre-treatment. Number two, it's about deprivation of the media where the temperature. You for every 10 degrees you have to cool this down. Just say an absorbent. I won't name them. Some of the parties claiming they can do everything. They can operate at only about 40 degrees C. Well, we have to operate at 70 to 80 degrees C. For every 10 degrees you cool it down to increase, heat it up again before re-injection is about $12 million a year in OpEx. So with Coke at the time, Coke Technologies, we run that consistently, 700 plus hours of steady state through those units and columns. We had a great hardly any depletion rate, running at 70 to 80 degrees C, and a 97% recovery rate. But again, was never perfect. The secret was that pre-treatment. If we had any silica go through, and the guys know that from the Salton Sea, from when they're recovering zinc, right? Same issues happen. So, we effectively used a lot of the technologies that were around, but we're cognizant of, again, temperature, and we're doing a really good job on pre-treatment. And ultimately, that's where the commercial opportunity has come from, is having to do that work versus a geothermal plant that's operating where you actually effectively bolt on a DLE is a very different concept, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. And just to for my understanding, how are you sort of stepping down in temperatures? So what temperature is the brine when it comes out of the geothermal plant, and how does that then feed into the rest of the plant?
So the temperature at wellheads around about 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Obviously, the best, most efficient way and commercially efficient way to cool that brine is through in our case, a single phase steam turbine. So that drops that temperature down to about just above atmospheric boiling point for the brine. It's separated at that point. We are then using traditionally the medium low pressure steam that goes towards concentrating and other processes, that kinetic energy, right? That runs through. So, we'd like to get that temperature down. We do drop it, so 10, 15 degrees through sort of heat exchange. So it's a little bit of cost to get it down to around 70 to 80. And we really like to re-inject at about 90 degrees for optimum, reservoir management.
Okay, cool. Moving on to sort of a little bit more sort of the market and everything. You've obviously announced the plans to list the subsidiary. Why did you go down the route of listing the subsidiary and not the parent company?
Yeah, look, there's two reasons for that. I think there's two separate markets, even though they're connected, right? So one is obviously publicly announced about a few months ago, a deal we done with Baker Hughes to develop, 560 megawatts of geothermal power to support the data center and AI. And I can tell you those negotiations are very aggressive, very active, if you're familiar with that space. And I think you certainly are. That, does not preclude us utilizing that spent brine, right? There's, like I said, circa 60 million pounds an hour of brine. There's a lot to support roughly, 560 megawatts. So that's one part of our business. We felt that the scale of four stages of critical minerals, I think respectfully, the market's very focused on, if you're in the mineral space and there's a reverse play there, great. You're in the power sector, that's a very different business. So we've had to do that. We learned the hard way that we're maybe too diverse, too many options, and sort of scare investors off, where investors seem to want, okay, what do you have, a proven process of lithium or zinc or manganese or potash or whatever it is. So I think the scale of it, 100 kilotons is probably a nice scale to get on our capacity of what ACR will punch out, and you're talking 3 million tons of potash and so on and so forth. So Matt, that's the non-scientific rationale. Obviously, a little bit more thought went into than that, but I think really nailing down, onshoring of critical minerals is our message, and I think that's been, well, according to Wall Street, which I am here now, has been very well received.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, I think that's pretty clear. And I guess the big sort of question is obviously Salton Sea. We've talked about it on and off over the years. But in the past couple of years, I guess the profile of the sort of basin has dropped a little bit. There haven't been very much news flow on it until quite recently. So what's changed that you sort of come out with this news on the listing and everything?
Look, yeah, like I said, I think time and timing. Yes, I think when lithium prices dropped, the chemistry's changed. I mean, we were originally, remember, lithium hydroxide. That's our process that we have with a SK1300 DFS. All sort of end to end. But obviously the market's going back to, look, seems LFP or other hybrids, where we're going back to carbonate, and that's great news. We're taking $110 million out of CapEx. I'm very happy about that, and pricing wise. So I think, yes, demand for, particularly, I think the focus has always been on EVs. I read somewhere this morning that the best market now is going to hit 30 or 40% by 2030. We're starting to see a steady state demand. So yes, the bell curve of the Salton Sea was like it always does. I mean, the market appears, Rodney probably knows more about this than me, but it seems to be starting to rebound as at this morning. And it does that. We went through 2017, went through 2019. We've all been around for a long time. It's nearly like a heartbeat. So we get on the right side of the market with the right types of contracts, long term, and finally settle on chemistry and whatever. But I think the indirect demand is starting to come out of the AI. We're going to see it from AI and data. With the discussions we have on our Baker Hughes deal, is the amount of gigawatt hours. I mean, I'll say gigawatt hours or megawatt hours of stationary batteries to be able to match the demand. It's not a base, we're providing baseload power, and even half a gigawatt's a lot, right? But you have huge amount of battery packs there that have to deal, every time you're on ChatGPT, the spike goes, so they then get the energy curves goes. So I think there's probably not enough coming out of the analysts yet on that, but I'll be watching that space very closely. So we're starting to see indirectly feeding back where the demands for some of these, metals, particularly lithium and others, are going to change, I think, rapidly quick.
Okay, great. And you've got a DFS on the lithium and the geothermal part, and as you alluded to, you're working on the scoping studies on the other parts. Are you able to sort of give any sort of ballpark views as to what the CapEx and the OpEx is going to be for the lithium and geothermal?
Yeah, at the moment, all in CapEx, or including recovery of silica, iron, zinc, manganese, polymetallics, lithium, and power, is around about $2 billion on CapEx. Um, it's That's what's sort of validated by the DFS. I think the other markets, it's interesting. Potassium, for example, we're at a PEA level study on that on the back end. It's a little bit of crystallization. It's one of the low hanging fruits as we move forward, and that'll go to PFS, DFS quite quickly, including supporting of 3 additional stages. Then on top of that, I think that if you look at I think you've got our deck, but you'll see the periodic table in there. I mean, the validation by INL. Well, we've got to sort of figure out. It's interesting where if we're going to remove potassium, we have to remove rubidium and cesium, right? Which are critical, very critical minerals. So it's a cause and effect opportunity, and calcium chloride will come from that as well. See, so you end up with these other revenue streams. And Matt, just to warrant it, no, we have not. That's not in the DFS, but I think that's where we're working toward a continual process of validation. And what is the cause and effect of each and every one of these studies that we do? Fortunately for us, when we worked on the live brine, we still have, I don't know, 50 tons of eluate and other materials. So it's easy for us to send to a national lab or a partner, or depending on how we do our deal construct, and have that validation done quite easily now, based on the work that we had previously done.
Okay, and just one last question from me. What is your timing looking like with regards to the sort of FID and heading towards first production? What does it look like from there?
Yeah, so our focal point, we particularly on besides permitting, right? And California's, it's a enjoyable jurisdiction. We've been through that. We have those. I think long lead equipment. So we have closer to $200 million of equipment on the ground. So our steam turbines, everything from switch gear, transformers, separators, and all of that. You would have seen in the deck, are staged, right? And you can't produce, your DLE and all that without the power. So all things equal, subject to how we go with our pipe raise that we're going through now here in New York. Ultimately, the public capital raise, I think, FID is about a 12-month end-to-end process, or a little less than 12 months. And we're sort of breaking that down into various capital tranches. So I know we've said, we're about 50% engineering, but I would say we're 80% on the front and maybe slightly less than 50 at the back. I mean, the back is a heavier engineering lift. So the process, flow sheets, design, all of that, heat mass balance is all done and locked in. It's the detailed engineering that we need to accelerate. And that's where, we more we inject capital in that, the quicker we can go on. But to answer your question, we can be online for power as early as mid 2027, lithium 2028. I think potassium and the other metals. I'm sorry, 2028 for lithium, manganese, zinc, silica, under the DFS is definitely a 2028. And 2029 is the potash and rare earths is the best we can give you right now, and that'll probably change next week. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. Over to Rodney.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Rod, so if you can just kind of given us an idea, we've discussed it now, the timing and completion of the scoping studies for the polymetallics and the potash.
Yeah, the studies are underway. We have Segment Nova Pros working on the potash now. We already have a process designed for that. So going through the additional scoping study, we expect that probably in about 3 weeks for potash. And then subsequent to that, we'll do the actual live eluate testing. That'll probably take another 60 to 90 days, Rodney, to complete that work. I think the additional work that would need to be done, we already know now that I mentioned earlier, some of the other metals or some of the other, cesium and rubidium and things like that you need to remove, we'll need to do a couple of parallel studies. So best guess now, I think we're only literally months away, and I could send you a white paper now, Rodney, on what the process looks like. But to define CapEx, OpEx to better than PFS level, you know what I mean? Sort of
Yes.
FEL2 type study, it's probably going to take, to be honest, probably 6 months, I would say.
Okay. And more broadly, Rod, can you outline where the project is from an engineering and permitting standpoint?
Absolutely. So we have a full CUP, so conditional use permit with the Imperial County for both the power plant and the lithium plant. The only outstanding permit we don't have yet, Rodney, we're in the Fast 41 program. We have one federal permit to do with the Clean Water Act. And I believe that should be resolved very, very shortly. And that's accessible. You can go on the Fast 41 dashboard. But every other permit is there and ready. Like I said, we have a long lead equipment either staged all over the place. Fuji Electric built the steam turbine generator set, so that's sitting in Kawasaki with a lot of equipment in Houston and all over the place on the separators and all sorts of things, switch yard and equipment, so ready and staged to go. So again, I think a credible path to FID or beyond FID, so COD, I'm sorry, for power will be more than likely mid 2027 and then followed 2028 with the back end lithium. And it really comes down to how quick we complete this particular raise, Rodney, and get the capital in to spend on the finalizing FEL3, if you like, on the back end.
Right. And then just lastly from me, you partnered with GM and Stellantis. Can you elaborate a little on the nature of those partnerships?
Yeah, the nature of the partnerships are a pathway to offtake. They're both very much motivated by CO2 free lithium supply. We both have a very amenable relationship in the sense of chemistry, and things have changed on both sides. Demands may have dropped, and we have that that flexibility. So great partners, great supporters, great friends, and it's one of those relationships. So I think that it's global, not just, and you probably reported on this, Rodney, across the board, where there has to be some flexibility between the parties until there's a steady state of whether it's EV manufacturing or BESS manufacturing or whatever that demand take up, and the market's got to behave itself, right, with what's going on in China and all of that as well.
Great. Thanks, Matt and Rodney. I have a couple of more questions, Rod, largely about, I guess, financing, capital structure, government support. Before I get into my questions, I'd like to thank again our sponsor, USCF Investments, who've been making it easier to get exposure to commodities investments for almost 20 years. USCF's Sustainable Battery Metals Strategy Fund, ZSB, is designed to capture investment exposure to metals powering electrification such as lithium, cobalt, copper, nickel, aluminum, and silver. To learn more, watch our inaugural episode with CEO John Love and visit uscfinvestments.com. And thanks as well to Lithium Royalty Corp, which just published their Q3 results, which demonstrated 86% growth in revenue from last year's third quarter, and also included the first royalty payment from their 3Q project operated by Zijin Mining in Argentina. To read that press release, visit their website, lithiumroyaltycorp.com, and follow them on X at lithium_royalty. So first of all, you're a private company, so none of our viewers could be really participating in a public equity here. But could you just walk through how you've raised money over? You said it's been 13 years in the making, or 8 years. I'm not sure. Like, how many rounds of financing have you done? How much capital have you raised to date? And how much money are you looking to raise? I guess now you said it in a pipe. I think you're doing, I guess, a private round now. Just curious, as you need 2 billion, to build this, how you know
Yep.
how you're going to do
So
that.
so today, yes, we have approximately 260 accredited or sophisticated investors. And we've had many rounds over the years, right? It has been 13 years or longer. I can't believe it to get to day one, but this is where we are. We've raised and deployed approximately $285 million. And that's everything from permitting to that long lead equipment that I mentioned. Yes, it's a $2 billion project, and the pre money, I guess, raise that's going on now. We'll raise around 150 to 200 over the next month or so, I guess. And then public money, obviously, the total capital stack required this ends around about $600 million. So it'll be a blend of pre and post, whether it's public money, market capital, or pre sophisticated investor institutional investment, Howard.
Okay, you're saying you're raising 150 to 200 million now. What was the 600 number?
That's the total equity stack against, a $2 billion project. If you assume a, 60 or 70% loan valuation ratio. So that's our target. And we'll keep you up to date on how that's going. We'll continue to make announcements. I think, as you know, to a successful listing is successful communications, Howard. And I think that, as we go through each step of this way, we'll keep you and your audience right up to speed on exactly where we are, and as the announcements start to roll out.
Oh, okay, appreciate that. We've seen from a U.S. government perspective, and we're interviewing very shortly Jigar Shah, who is the former head of the Loan Programs Office, and geothermal has been talked about as being, it was popular, under when he was there, but also Chris Wright has talked up geothermal, but a bit, but he's talked up nuclear a lot more, and obviously, fossil fuels. But so where you mentioned you have a deal with Baker Hughes, but that's not part of the company now. But could you just discuss, I guess, the attitude toward geothermal, and also the Loan Programs Office did make a conditional loan in January to Energy Source Minerals of $1.3 billion. That was before Trump came into office, and there has been a shift, it seems, from the Department of Energy to the Department of War in terms of where the checks are coming from. So if you could just, I guess, talk broadly about geothermal, the financing, environment, attitude, and maybe some of your peers, Berkshire Hathaway, ESM, the Salton Sea. Sorry, one last comment is that Jigar had mentioned, he had written just before he left, that he thinks the U.S. could become an exporter of lithium by 2035. In a similar way, it took 10 years for us to go from net importer of oil and gas to exporter, using unconventional methods. If you can comment about all of that dynamic.
Absolutely. Look, regardless of politics, I mean, the US government in general over the last 13 years have been extremely supportive of the Salton Sea region. I mean, it doesn't really matter which side of the aisle is. I mean, the budgets may go from, and say hello to Jigger for me, by the way, but the budgets may go from DOE across to Department of War, like you said. I think that firstly, the deal with Baker Hughes, we're calling data co deal, that 560 megawatts in a brief conversation with Howard Lutnick and others, you sort of realize how critical that is to national security and baseload power, as it is with nuclear and coal and combined cycle or whatever the source is incredibly important for reliable, the type of energy that's required for these data centers. So So CTR with Baker are looking at co-location of data centers, and there's a huge support. Chris Wright, the whole administration, like I said, Howard will be at the White House on Friday. I think paired with critical minerals production, right? If you really think about that, I mean, that is beyond lithium and whatever else we can produce. We believe there's an enormous support there and the form again of national security. And I think that the US across the board, whether it's MP Materials or our friends across at LAC or any of these other, US rare earths or others, you know, the opportunity here is the raw materials do exist, right? And like I'm saying with a heavy caveat, yes, we have most of those. I mean, like your grandmother's soup, right? We've got most of them do exist. Quite a large amount of those. We have 22 of the 50 that we've got more work to do. But the ultimate opportunity here, how it is the compounds themselves, right? Do we, CTR actually does, from lithium chloride to carbonate to hydroxide. So, you get to compounds. Does that really need to be exported? Number one, do we, rubidium, is it a raw material, make rubidium carbonate, for example, that's over $1 million a ton. So there's so many opportunities here, but I would say that across, without getting into politics, whether it's the California government or with federal administration, there's a huge drive and support for any of those programs that have either previously been supported by GIGA or in our case, it's USXM, right? So US government, as far as debt goes, or grants. And it'll be interesting. I think Friday we'll learn a little bit more about what's going on in defence, what the mechanisms. But there's a good pool of money there, and again, some of their investments. And I'm following your station, Howard, on where the federal government's been supporting, and then clearly they're public companies as well.
Right. I mean, they announced earlier this week a deal with Vulcan Elements, not to be confused by the German DLE play, but Vulcan Elements just completed a Series A like 3 months ago, like $60 million, and here they are announcing a $1.4 billion deal with another company. I think Re-Element Technologies. There was equity, debt, warrants. I think it's still subject to due diligence, but what struck me was that one, it was equity again in a similar way. They were writing equity into MP, but this was very early stage compared to MP. So it's just, I'm wondering, rare earths obviously much more topical, the Achilles heel in our negotiations with China than lithium is and some of the others. But again, your geothermal component, I'm just trying to understand. Obviously, this is California, which is a blue state, and we have red state, administration here. But it's a very interesting resource. Again, there are 11 geothermal plants, I believe, already operating there. So, I would think data centers and geothermal, like that could be a driver, of the lithium and other parts of the story rather than, the other way around. So any comment on that and the early stage, kind of Vulcan Elements? I guess you said on Friday you're going to meet up with them, so maybe you'll have a better frame. You obviously can't disclose. You have to be very careful on disclosing any of these things, but anything you can talk about would be welcome.
You're completely right. We will produce, 560 megawatts with Baker. That's over and above our first stage of 50. That will be all sold. I can guarantee it, how it'll be all sold to major data centers. We're just literally in that negotiations. Does CTR do direct PPAs and become that developer, or do we partner with a developer that just specializes in, any of the many the data operators? And I think that fundamentally the price of power is probably doubled, particularly baseload power. And I think it's a bit of a, it's first to the ribbon when it comes to, if you can deliver in 2027. I think that's one of the elements of this project really has in a positive note, whether it's Fed, state, data center operators, developers, and anyone else, that we are shovel ready. So, getting power, whether it's in segments of 50 megawatts, I think the way Baker Hughes have designed the multiple stages are in about 100 to 80 to 100 megawatt stages. So it's about who can get there across the finish line pre-2030, and particularly where we can say, right, we'll sell you 50 megawatts right now on land that's actually zoned on a programmatic plan. So we actually are now competitive with Texas and Louisiana and everywhere else where they usually go. That's all been front loaded. It's all permitted on the land use side of things. So I think it's a very compelling argument. I think, yes, I can't disclose what we're talking about at the White House, but again, there's a huge support around that, and maybe we should reconnect when appropriate, Howard, and give you a bit more of a download. But everything you're saying is, I can just nod and say, yep, it's all good. But the idiosyncrasies of all of that is just, it needs to come together. And honestly, it's all about execution now. That's what we've got to get right and get going.
Okay. A few more on this. Like, so you have GM and Stellantis as partners. A few years ago, EVs were all the rage, and auto industry realized they needed to kind of go upstream. Now you're seeing Apple coming into MP. You're seeing NVIDIA come into Redwood Materials. Do you see the hyperscalers, data centers, Amazon and Google, I think, have nuclear related activities? Could these become, you know, equity investors, offtake partners for either or your geothermal, and your lithium?
Well, Howard, yes, yes, and yes. I mean, we're here in New York. We've had to divide and conquer. We've got the team from Baker here with some of these top end companies. Some of them I can't really mention with the NDAs, but there's just a massive demand. I mean, it's just not out there publicly, but we are actually in really active negotiations with those deals. And it's interesting because if you think about, if you take tax equity, right, the PTCs survive until 2032. You've got some of these big players that pay way too much tax, no doubt, right? You've got available land. They want to they want to be as close as possible to the generator from a frequency standpoint. They need variability. So again, having 7 plants with a variability basis behind the meter, still connected to the system, is very, very attractive, right? And I think that in itself is its own sort of next rock channel update possibly. But I even just say from from a business guy myself, that we are in the thick of that. And like I said, my opening comment was, I think the big hand's about to catch up with the little hand here in the timing circle. So it's so close. I just can't comment on who they are. I think you probably know, and your audience will probably have a good idea. But without having the resource, we couldn't do that, right? And that's one thing. The Salton Sea resource is, so proven. 45 years of operation, no heat and temperature, minerals deprivation is, we could produce a gigawatt of power, right? So we're moving ahead with a pretty big bite-sized chunk of 560 megawatts, and with zoned land, effectively ready to build on, with a shovel-ready site, project that they can connect to as a first stage, and they stage these things out. So what you're seeing in Louisiana and West Texas is probably what you're going to see at the Salton Sea in the near future.
Okay. I got two more questions. One related to, I guess, Arkansas. You mentioned Koch Technologies was involved in you, but they recently sold their business, I understand, to Aquatech, right? So I was trying to assess that. I don't know Aquatech well. I think it's a reasonable sized company, but one of the arguments that on the DLE side that has been promoted is the big oil, including Koch, is in the mix. I mean, Koch had a technology more than they had a resource. But what's your read on Koch seemingly exiting this promising business?
Yeah, I think the simple answer to that is, whoever gets to the single flow sheet is the winner, right? In any DLEs, like I'm talking about pre-treatment all the way through to conversion, all the way to bagging. And I think that it's publicly announced. So you read about Aquatech and their Cerberus's investment in Aquatech. Part of that play is I think they effectively involved in Standard and others, and I'm just quoting some public known information, but that, I think that was a great move. I mean, Coke were great. The great technology. We tested it on, yes, on this, like Matt said, this challenging brine, and it come up at a great, non-attrition rate, great temperature values, great recovery rate. But now we have a single flow sheet, process guarantee, if you like, from soup to nuts, and that just does not exist. And I think one of the challenges with any DLE is you have a single guarantee, then you've got to stop and start, and you're always going to have fingers pointing. Howard, you know how it is, legally speaking. So I think that was a really, really good move on that. I think that, for someone to be able to go like even a Coke to be able to provide that's a huge investment. You've got to go much further upstream, further downstream to be able to incorporate all of that. So I think it was a very intelligent move by Vinky and his team at Aquatech.
Interesting. Thanks for the color. Aquatech's a private company. Not a lot of people know that much about it, but I didn't know Cerberus had invested in them. The former CEO of Cerberus is at the Department of War, and he is the person who I understand negotiated and wrote the MP check. So just trying to connect some dots here. There are other players, connected to this. So that's interesting. And on the America becoming an exporter of lithium by
Because
2035.
one of the challenges we had was lithium, and you guys know this. Lithium hydroxide is very a difficult product to ship. That's where we were heading. Carbonate now is a very different story, and I think Europe is a prime target. They still have the European passport. I think we qualify. We're de minimis in the CO2 sectors. We've got continued calls going on in Europe all the time. Again, say with who, but it's probably obvious. So yeah, carbonate, I think is a great proposition, and even great companies like Stellantis. I'm not saying they're doing that. I'm not even speaking on behalf of them, but the prospect of exporting, I think, is quite high. And of course, South Korea is the other obvious factor, and it's not beyond lithium, right? I mean, if you think about potassium, just think about, the US imports 10.4 million metric tons from Russia and Canada, right? We'll produce, this ACR will produce about 3 or a little over 3 million tons per year. So we can start to move the change. Whether that's an export or not, Howard, I don't know, but you can sort of see where we're heading when it comes to localizing on some of these things that have been imported for the longest time.
Okay, and the 2 billion CapEx you said, is that for 100,000 tons? Because I think the ESM was like 20,000 tons for
No,
1 point.
that's That's how stage one. That's 25,000 tons, 50
Okay.
megawatts, 108,000 tons zinc manganese, and whatever the
Okay. All right. So you
917
have
is.
aspirations to grow to 100,000, but modularly start with 25,000.
Yeah, yeah. I think the concept, the stage one's always going to be the hardest, right? And we've got a multi-stage develop, could be 10, 15 stages. Well, there's no coincidence we brought in Baker Hughes. I think we needed that oil and gas experience. If we think about drilling 45 wells across a major well of 6,000 acres, you really want to master plan that, not a respectfully building a single plant here and another single plant and, have an injection and production. We've really thought about the whole proper resource management as you would in a DESA or, typical oil field type of development. So then, of course, we don't want a different turbine and generator for every time we build one. You want the same pumps. And I think that's how we get the LCOE, or levelized cost of energy, down, levelized cost of minerals production down, just by scale and scalability. And I think that, we get past stage one, we can start to hopefully reap those rewards.
Excellent. Rod, thank you very much for answering all of our questions, and congratulations, I guess, on the announcement, and look forward to hearing more, as you hopefully progress to a U.S. listing sometime next year.
We'll be first to hear about it, Howard. And always a pleasure catching up, guys. Appreciate it.
Okay. Good luck with the raise. Look at the current private raise.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.